All right, how's everybody doing? Welcome back to another week of um, the DSKUS Data Science Exchange Program. So now that we've kind of gotten things started and kicked off, I hope you guys are working on all your project stuff and starting to do some background research and stuff like that. And so this week, we're going to kind of start to talk about the next thing we're going to be starting to work on, this week, in the next couple of weeks. What you're going to see is we're going to start to layer things. So as you're working on your annotated bibliography, we're going to start working on the next thing, which is going to be data gathering, which is finding data sources that you can use to actually analyze. And then as we're finishing that, we'll start working on the next thing, which is going to be doing some exploratory data analysis. And then we'll start working on maybe some feature engineering, and then we'll do some brainstorming activities. And then this is what you'll see during the semester. Like, we'll kind of halfway through one thing, we'll kind of start the next thing. And so things are going to be layered. And that's why I say each of these tasks that we give you, you need to work on them, because you really just have like a week or two before we're going to basically start you on the next task. And so it's important to kind of, even though you may have like several weeks to finish one task, really maybe half of that time you'll be working on a task, and then the other half of the time you'll be doing that task plus something else, and then you'll maybe finishing something else and doing this and then starting something else. So it's important to kind of stay up to it. But this week and next week, we're going to start to also then add in this data gathering phase, which is finding data sources. And some of you guys may have already started to do this, and some of you guys maybe your mentors have started to do this, you started to talk about this. But I'm going to kind of talk to you guys about some options for finding different data, some that you may know and some that you may not be aware of, things that data sources that I often use in these data science project kind of classes. So I always refer to this as the hunt, right? A big part of data science is actually identifying possible data sources you can use for your analysis. Whether you're doing it inside a company or you're doing it outside a company, often even inside of companies, it's not so clear what all the data that is available. And a lot of times the data is siloed in different places. I've experienced this, especially at big companies, but even small companies, I've seen this happen. Nancy over in accounting, Nancy, she's got, a little like Microsoft Access database. And so, she, like, most of your data is up in your corporate data warehouse. But Nancy's got, the last year's worth of, sales data to some particular set of customers, and it's just on her desktop, on her little Access database that somebody set up for her 8 years ago. I've seen this happen. And so then you got to figure out how to get that data out of her little Access database and merge it with data coming from your corporate data warehouse. And, there's just data everywhere. And organizations like this, it's data in spreadsheets and data in this database, data in that database. But also in projects like this, you guys are going to see this, is like outside of the organization, there are many different places we can find data. And I'm going to talk about this in the next couple of slides. Everything from the sort of machine learning sort of websites like Kaggle to government websites to these data set search tools that exist. So I refer to this as sort of detective work, right? We're essentially data sleuthing, right? Nobody knows what the truth is, and nobody knows where the evidence is, where the hints are, and we're just kind of Sherlock Holmes kind of looking for clues, like, oh, that might be an interesting thing, right? And of course, we haven't even completely defined our question yet. So then that means there's many possible options, many possible paths to go down. So it's kind of like detective work, right? And a lot of what we end up sort of deciding and finalizing, to do on our projects later, a lot of the hypotheses that you guys are going to settle on as far as what you're actually going to try to solve is going to be dependent on the kinds of data you can find. If you can't find certain kinds of data, then maybe some questions are just not possible to answer. So those are not good questions to ask. So we really have to kind of start to work on this over the coming weeks so we can actually figure out what is possible and what is not possible, right? So that's going to be our focus. That's going to be, well, we're going to work on the annotated bibliography and kind of build up our knowledge base, but kind of starting this week and next week, we'll start to look at trying to identify these data sources so that come the beginning of April, the first week of April, we'll have some stuff to work with. So there's several different places you can find data. One of those are, we didn't provide links in the document, but a lot of your mentors have started to look around and find some potential data sources and websites that have information about topics. One thing you can do is do something called spider web searching, where, like, let's say you're reading on Wikipedia about some topic. Well, there are links there, and you can go and click on those links and go look at those links and look then at the information that those links have. But you can also then go look at things that they cite, right? And so you can kind of go through this sort of backwards in time, kind of fan out through the references you have, and from your literature review, and then you can look at their references, and then you can look at the references of the references, and you can kind of go back in time. But also, if you guys are finding some interesting sources, you will also find that if you're clever about it, you can actually also go find other sources that cite the sources that you have. And so you're basically going in two directions. You're looking at the things that the sources you have cite, and you're also looking for other websites in the future that have cited the sort of core information you found. And so a lot of times your literature review will lead you to these kinds of what I will call sort of leads, right? Like clues, right? Like danso, as they say in Korean, danso, right? So you have these like clues, and it's just like detective work. A lot of times you just got to follow these leads, and you'll come across data sets or other sources of information that you didn't even know existed. So one thing is to leverage your literature review and leverage those resources and the sources that you're finding and reading, and look and see what kinds of data they're working with, see what kinds of things they reference, go try to figure out what things reference them, and do this spider web searching. Another great source of information is government websites. I'm going to change up my screen here real quick. Hold on a second. Another great source of information is government websites, right? And this is going to be true in Korea. It's going to be true in the United States. Government websites, and not just Korea and the United States. Say you're interested in manufacturing in Vietnam. There are Vietnamese government websites, that do this stuff. But if you go look on the internet, what you can find is, say you're doing something about healthcare. Well, there is, of course, in the United States, there is the CDC website, right? And you can just go there. And what you'll find is they actually have, if you look through here, they actually have tons of data and statistics, right? Literally on here. It says data and statistics. And you click on it, and whoa, wow, look at this. They got data about all kinds of stuff, right? And you can find stuff about heart disease and genomics and smoking and all kinds of stuff. And they have various data explorers, so you can find stuff where you can find information like geographically or other kinds of information where they map stuff. So tons of data here, right? And of course in Korea, it's the same thing, right? There is a Korean CDC. It's called the Korean CDC, KCDC. And if you Google that, you'll come across this as well, right? And this website, actually, this is great because they actually have it in Korean and in English, so that you can actually use it in both, right? So that is amazing. Now, I will say this, some Korean websites, government websites, you can't get all the information on the English version. So I would actually recommend, if you do want to search for information and you're like, well, it seems like there should be more information available, what I would recommend you do is you go use Google. And this is true of other country websites too. Use Google Translate, and you just translate it automatically in English. And then you can find stuff here, right? Not perfect Google Translate, sometimes a little rough, but you'll find on here that they actually do have information about various things, right? There's actually information pages. There's a national health information portal on the KCDC website. So they actually have these sort of data explorer type things where you can go. Like I say, if you're on the English version, you know, they'll have some information, but it may not be as comprehensive. But you know, like I say, you can explore it by just going around clicking on links, right? And here you go. You got stuff here. You got cardiovascular disease information, health information, cancer information, all kinds of stuff, right? And of course, this is an example of healthcare, but it doesn't have to be healthcare, right? You can also, there's, you know, let me go back over here. You can also go back to Google here, and you can look on, like, let's say you're doing something with pollution or climate change, right? Or energy. There's an EPA, there's an Environmental Protection Agency. You click on this, and it's going to be the same thing. They're going to have tons of information. They're going to have some data repositories where you are able to like download data, right? And if you just search around on these things, you're going to find all kinds of resources and data and all that stuff. They also often have, you know, search bars on these things. So you can find data about, I'm going to wait for this to pop up, but you can find data about, you know, stuff, open data. Whoa, that's cool. All EPA data available by default. See, there you go. Data catalogs, EPA.gov.data. Wow. See, you just download tons of data, right? And again, this is, of course, in the United States, but there is also I don't remember the name exactly of it. There's a Korean EPA. Oh my God, seriously. Government website. Seriously. So there is a Korean EPA. I can't remember the exact name of it. Whatever this is, EPA.gov. I don't know. There's a Korean EPA. I can't remember the exact name of I guess the Ministry of the Environment. Okay, Ministry of the Environment. Korean EPA. There are government agencies for economics, you know, finance, transportation, energy, everything. And basically they have in the United States, they have them in Korea. But like I mentioned, if you go, you can also find, you know, let's say you want some information about Vietnam, right? You can find information on here. You can find, there's a Vietnamese EPA, there's a Japanese EPA, there's an Australian EPA, CDC, Department of Energy, China, there's these departments, although I don't know if I would trust information coming from China. But that aside, you can find these websites in countries all over the world, and a lot of them have data and you can download it. So government websites are a fantastic source of data about a lot of problems, but especially about the projects you're working on, because these are policy related. Another place to search for data, so government websites, and then also using your Lit Review. Another place is, of course, good old-fashioned Kaggle, right? So a lot of you guys know a lot of you guys know Kaggle, so yeah, that worked. So if I open it up, we'll find that I can open it, and then Kaggle, here's Kaggle, and then Kaggle just has a ton of data sets, and you can search for things, right? If I'm like, how about climate change? You know, and there's 48 data sets, right? What if I'm like, what about the nuclear, I don't know, nuclear energy? Here's 17 data sets, right? Nuclear power plants, nuclear warheads. There you go. U.S. commercial nuclear reactors. What about transportation? 34 data sets. What about like cargo? Maybe like moving cargo. There's cargo data sets. What about supply chains? Just searching for stuff, right? I found nothing. I finally found nothing. What about semiconductors? Just searching random stuff. I'm always curious. I have so many data sets up here. You got one data set. There you go. All right. So lots of stuff, right? You can find data sets on all kinds of stuff. You know, whatever, right? Ukraine-Russia war, all kinds of stuff up here. So lots of sources. And then, if that's not enough, there's also now Google in the last couple of years has released this data set search function. Okay, there it goes. So data set, so it's basically just like Google, and I can search for data sets. I can be like, I want data sets about climate change or transportation efforts, right? They found 100+ data sets, right? Some of these are going to come from Kaggle, right? But some of them are going to come from other places like data.gov, data.world. Remember, that was coming from the World Bank, right? Some of them are coming from specific countries. Some of them will be pulled off government websites, like here's something in the UK and Britain. Some of them will come from other websites. I will warn you, you need to actually, you'll find some data sets up here that are pretty cool. Not everything Google's data set search returns is free. Some of these data sets will be free, but some of them you will have to pay to access. Now, sometimes the access costs like $5, and so maybe it's worth it, but sometimes it's more expensive, and so maybe it's not worth it. So, you'll have to kind of look. I generally prefer free data, honestly, just like that. I don't think data should be owned by anybody, but especially not for things like climate change and other things. But there's a ton of data sets up here, and you can find them on this Explorer as well. So that's another option. So as I mentioned, let's go back and change this here. Do that, and let's see if I get this here. Okay, as I mentioned, there are a ton of places to find data. So you do any one of these. I would recommend doing all of them and just try to find many data sources as you can. One thing I'm going to mention is not every data source you find is going to end up being useful. And that's why it's important to find many different data sets, possibly 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Ideally, you would like to have several usable data sets by come April, right? Maybe like 5 or 6 even. But a lot of times data sets you find, you actually look at the data, at the features, and you actually realize later that it's not all that useful. Or you'll realize when you do exploratory data analysis, it's not all that useful. So it's really important that you guys are going to need to start in the next couple of weeks looking for data sources and finding as many options as you can so that you have many, many options. And one thing I'll mention is data comes in many forms. Data is not just data in a database. It's in what I like to call an abstraction of reality. So one thing that you need to think about, and one thing you need to kind of keep an open mind about at this point in the project, is not to limit yourself to data that you know about. Be open-minded about, like, maybe it's something you never thought about, related to your problem or your project topic, but it might be a really interesting path to go down. Like I mentioned on the data sleuthing, part, really at this point, you kind of have to assume that you don't know very much, right? And we have a lot to learn about our topic. So you need to kind of keep an open mind and realize there's data all around us, data that we don't even realize, right? And data is not just simply data in a database. It's meant to be this abstraction of reality. And if you think about it, there's literally data being collected every second of every day about all kinds of things. And so really the possibilities are endless, right? And so I would encourage you to kind of think creatively when you're searching for data sources. Same thing as when as you're doing the lit review. Be creative. Don't limit yourself just to what you know, but think about aspects of the problem that maybe you've never thought about before. And maybe that might be a really interesting thing, a really interesting path to go down, right? Because in reality, there's data that doesn't always seem like it's related to a particular topic, but really it is, right? Really it is, right? You could think about climate change's effect on health, right? On people's health outcomes, right? Not necessarily maybe something you would think of right off the bat if you're thinking about climate change, but it's definitely something that has, there's definitely, some potential impact on, dirty air and people's health outcomes, right? And so, that's a path you could go down. And it may depend on where you're from, right? So in the United States, I have a house in Chicago, so I've spent a lot of time there, and the air there is pretty clean, right? You go outside, run around, see blue skies. But here in Asia, because of a lot of the industrialization that's happened in China, we have some days where the air is just filthy. Even here in Korea, where we're 100 miles away from China, sometimes if the wind's blowing correctly and the winds whip in across the Gobi Desert, they pick up all this pollution and all this, sand and stuff, and they blow it in, and everything's just like a yellow haze, right? And then it's gone 12 hours later, but for like 12 hours, the air is really, really filthy, And so it may be something too where you live, you never really thought about it, but a different part of the world, this may be a real issue with things like climate change or industrialization or global supply chains or disinformation or whatever, right? So kind of that's all I'm saying is kind of keep an open mind when you're looking for data sources. There may be things you've never considered before that actually may be related to your topic, and that may be another path for your group to explore, right? So the last thing I'll mention here today, I'm not going to try to keep it under 30 minutes. I was unsuccessful the first 2 weeks, but I'm going to do it today. The other thing to remember is garbage in, garbage out. I already mentioned this, but a lot of data sources are going to have issues. They're going to have missing data, errant values, bad values, fields that's not really clear. Like, what does that mean? What is this? Right? And there are going to be some data sets you download and you look at and you're like, this is just an utter pile of steaming crap. This is a big pile of crap. And you end up just getting rid of it because it's not useful. One thing you do need to be careful about as you're gathering data is really you want to kind of evaluate the quality of the data sets that you do find. And, because the problem you're going to run into is this, the classic sort of garbage in, garbage out, the GIGO problem. So you do need to kind of evaluate the data sets you're finding. Not all data sets are equal. Some are higher quality than others. And, sometimes some quality issues are okay, but sometimes the quality issues are so bad that you really just have to throw the data out. Another thing to keep in mind is data bias, right? There is no data set in the world that is objective, right? There's no data set in the world that is objective, right? Every data set in the world is the result of human choices, right? Some person has decided that we're going to collect that field and we're going to collect it in this way, and this means this and this means that, right? Somebody, right, even for like AI or robotics or whatever, somebody has decided that this is the data we're going to collect, and here's how we're going to collect it, and here's how we're going to define it. And they've also decided that these other data fields, these other features, we're going to ignore them. We're going to ignore them, right? We're not going to collect them. So data, what you have to keep in mind is data is always the result of human choices. And that means any data set you find is biased by definition, right? It's inescapable. And it may not be conscious bias, it may be subconscious, and the bias may not be fatal in any meaningful way. It may not actually really impact your analysis and results, but you can't think of data as an objective thing. Data is by definition always subjective, and we should always be cautious about the inferences we draw from it, and we should always be a little bit suspicious of the data that we find as we're working on data science projects, either in this program, in this DSKUS program, or when you guys go on and graduate and become data scientists. You should always have your skeptic hat on and be like, what do I not know about this data? Who made what decision? What's being left out, right? What did they leave out? Because the biggest problem we have in the world are what is referred to as these filter bubbles. This is a book by Eli Pariser, and this is him giving a TED talk about 10 years ago. This is my all-time favorite TED talk. It only lasts about 10 minutes. If you've never seen it, go find it. You can literally just search on YouTube for filter bubbles. It was fantastic, really, really eye-opening. And even though it's 10 years old, it's still absolutely 100% true today. Even though he talks at the end of his TED talk about things we could do to improve it, we have basically done nothing in the last 10 years to make it better. In fact, it's actually probably gotten worse, which is kind of crazy, right? But the filter bubbles are great, especially for the group that's working on disinformation campaigns, group 3. You're going to see a lot of stuff in there that's really, really relevant. But I think for all the groups, there's definitely some interesting stuff. And just outside of this program, it's a really interesting TED Talk. But for the purposes of today, what's interesting about the filter bubble is the problem is, basically in a nutshell, the problem is we don't know what we don't know, right? If people leave something out of a data set, we don't know that it was left out. And we don't know what it is. And we don't even know what it would look like if they had collected. And this is true of every data set. There's always something that was not collected. There was always some piece of information that did not get included. And we don't know what we don't know. So always kind of keep that in mind when you're looking at these data sets, these filter bubbles, as they're called, and these data bias kind of issues. From a policy perspective, these are going to be concerns. If we're going to develop effective policy solutions and there's something we don't know, and we don't even know we don't know, that's going to be a little bit of an issue. We may come up with a plan that works, assuming we know everything, right? So we need to be wary of making the assumption we have the whole picture. We should constantly be asking ourselves, what are we missing? What have we overlooked? What other kinds of information might be out there that are not in the data that we have available? What are the potential implications of that or outcomes of that? So these are all things we should be concerned about. So I just kind of put that out there, but as you guys continue work on your lit review this week, I would be expecting you guys kind of be towards the end of this week and especially next week to start looking for these data sources. So you need to talk amongst your groups and come up with a plan, you know, who's doing what parts of the lit review, and then also start deciding, okay, who's going to go, you know, who's going to look where, right? Or what kind of data are you going to look for? I'm going to look for this kind of data. You guys basically need to self-organize and come up with a plan for the kinds of data that you're going to start to hunt down, and you need to actually then go find it, right? So the annotated bibliography is going to be due 2 weeks from like this week, kind of the middle of this week, sort of, yeah, about maybe 2 weeks from the end of this week. I can't remember. I think I said it due on I may have said it due on a Friday. So 2 weeks from this Friday, I guess, this coming Friday. But then kind of at the end of this week, and especially next week, you need to start looking for available data sources. We're going to start doing some exploratory data analysis once we kind of get done as we're kind of finishing the annotated bibliography, sort of the first, second week of April. So that means you basically in the next couple of weeks need to find these data sources. So you can use some of the suggestions from your mentors if they've found some things. I've showed you some examples to go find your own data sources, do some internet searching, government websites, Google and all those things. And then, you know, I would say that you're expected to find your own data sets, right? We'll kind of help you and make some suggestions, but part of this project is learning how to do this data sleuthing type stuff. So you need to start kind of including that in your planning, your group planning, either this week or next week, of who's gonna do what. And then make sure you set aside some time to work on this. At the same time, you need to keep reading your background, doing your lit review, and putting together the annotated bibliography. You should have like a short blurb about each citation, where you have like a paragraph describing each one and what it has to do with your topic. All right, so that's under 30 minutes. So I'm going to wrap this up here. If you guys have any questions, please do email me or ask your mentors. And I'll kind of check in with you guys over the next week. And then there'll be another lecture next week talking about what are we talking about next week? What are we talking about next week? That's a good question. There'll be another lecture next week. So next week we were actually going to have a global policy seminar, but we haven't actually found anybody to do it. We have the embassy's going to do the one in April. So next week I may actually just post a reading, or actually it's already posted, about international policy, and then may actually just do a lecture where we kind of talk about maybe like feature selection, feature engineering, and those kind of topics for the data analysis you're going to be doing in April. So we'll post some more information about that on the LMS, make an announcement once we figure that out. But anyway, if you guys have questions, please email me or ask your mentors, and I hope you guys have a great week. All right, thanks.